And now we're live. Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you everyone so much for joining us this evening. I am delighted to be here tonight for our live virtual event with journalist Daniel Barbarisi. I'm Jessica from the Country Bookshelf in Bozeman, Montana, on the ancestral unceded land of the Upsallaki Crow, Salish Kootenai, Cheyenne, Shoshone-Bannock, and Achetish-Chukowin people. We encourage those of you from joining us from outside Bozeman and Montana to learn about the land that you occupy and the stories of its peoples. We're grateful to be here in this virtual space with our fellow Books in Common Northwest stores, Paulina Springs Books in Sisters, Oregon, and Madison Books in Seattle, Washington. Be sure to check out booksincommonnw.com for more information about upcoming events like Thursday's event with the Revenant author, Michael Punk. You can also follow us on Eventbrite and just register for everything and get notified the moment we post a new event. Before we get to Daniel this evening, I do want to point out just a couple things about our virtual space. There's a link in the chat where you can purchase a copy of Chasing the Thrill. Just click on the logo of your favorite sponsoring store and it will take you away to purchase your copy. We do have signed copies here at Country Bookshelf, so if you're interested in an autograph, do select Country Bookshelf. We are recording this event and it will be viewable later on the Books in Common NW YouTube channel after the event concludes. If you have any questions for Daniel, you can submit them by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, or drop them in the chat and we'll get to them as time allows. If you run into any tech issues along the way, we recommend you first try exiting and re-entering the meeting. If you aren't able to re-enter the webinar, you can view the live stream on the event on our YouTube channel. And if you're having trouble with some of the sound, we do recommend trying headphones that can really help resolve those things. I do want to remind everyone that this is a shared creative space that we want to remain safe for everyone, and ask that you be respectful of all that have joined us tonight. Offensive or inappropriate comments or questions will see the user dismissed from the space. So without further ado, Daniel Barbarisi is the author of Dueling with Kings and Chasing the Thrill. He's currently a senior editor at The Athletic after years as a reporter at the Wall Street Journal and the Providence Journal. He resides with his wife and 2 sons outside Boston. Daniel, thanks so much for joining us.
Jessica, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
We here in Bozeman are on, I guess we could call it the Forrest Fenn Trail. So it was wonderful to hear about the book and to get to host you for Books in Common tonight. I'm very curious if you started out as a treasure hunter or if you started out as a journalist.
That's a good question.
As you were investigating this story.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, they both kind of happened pretty contemporaneously. And by the way, side note, I did go through Bozeman as part of the book, so I flew into there flew in and out of there of one of my trips to Yellowstone. And so at least I don't know if I went by the store, but I am at least familiar with the area to some extent. But yeah, so when I first heard about this, which was the early part of 2017. A guy who, Beep, Jay Rayner, a guy who I had kind of shadowed for my last book, Dueling the Kings, which is right back there, top one, current book, old book. So anyway, he was my mentor in that last book as I became a daily fantasy sports shark, like DraftKings and FanDuel and all that. And so he basically told me about this thing, that there was a treasure hunt and it was a real thing and I should be a part of it and we should go be treasure hunters and I should write about it. And pretty immediately I was like, whoa, A, that all sounds amazing. And B, I want to do all those things. I want to go be a treasure hunter, but this is an incredible story. I need to tell this story if I can. I very quickly said, is there a book about this? Is there a book about this in the offing? And, tried to get my agent to find out if somebody else was deep in the process on something like this. And turned out there wasn't in any real way. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to go try to be a treasure hunter and tell the story of this thing because, A, being a treasure hunter is cool. It's a lot of fun. But also, as I did in similar fashion in the last book, I think that in these kind of very insular, down the rabbit hole type communities, one of the best ways to tell the rest of the world what it's really like in there can be to experience it and to say, okay, this is what it's really like from the inside, to live it, to not really just follow it, because then you get kind of a fishbowl look at it. And I don't know if it's always almost by its nature, when you're doing something like that, there can be a little bit of a, you know, I'm looking down from here on this thing. And I was trying not to have that kind of point of view. I wanted to have very much like I'm in the middle of it. This is what it is. So I wanted to be both, you know, for the purposes of storytelling, and also because, you know, look, again, I get to be a treasure hunter. That's pretty fun. So kind of try to do those both in tandem.
Wonderful. Did you come up with like a great elevator pitch or sort of like your 5-minute blurb for what was going on? Because this is, I feel like it's kind of like a comet. Like there are a lot of tales around this kind of central theme of the Forrest Fenn treasure. So I'm curious how you pitched it to your agent and how you pitched it to Knopf.
Let me see. Let me try that for you. Okay. All right. So I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but about 10 years ago, there was this guy named Forrest Fenn. He was an old ex-fighter pilot who turned into kind of art dealer to the stars. And believe it or not, he actually hid a treasure chest, like a real live treasure chest somewhere in the Southwest, in the Rocky Mountains, north of Santa Fe. He had been diagnosed with cancer in the 80s, and eventually he beat the cancer, but he liked the idea of the whole thing. So he decided, all right, I'm just going to do this thing. So anyway, around 2010, he hides the treasure, starts out small, a bunch of people start looking at for it. And then in a couple of years, it blows up huge. And so since then, a lot of crazy things have happened. This is 2017, if we're doing the elevator pitch. Somebody actually died looking for the treasure last year. And I want to get into this thing and tell the story of it. And I think I can do that in a very similar way to the last book. And I can kind of dive in, become one of the treasure hunters, try to follow this thing. And, you know, we'll just kind of see where it leads. Well, Dan, what about if the fact that the treasure likely isn't going to be found during the life cycle of the book? That's a great question. But to me, really, it's not about whether the treasure is found or not. It's about whether, you know, this thing you're telling the story of the hunt and all the things that go right and wrong when you drop a treasure hunt into the modern world. And so it's just the story of the very human story of what a treasure hunt makes people do and kind of why we want to believe in things like this and chase things like this and you know, why those things resonate with us. Okay, Dan, sounds good. Here's a book deal. So that's kind of how that generally speaking went, as far as I could figure it.
I feel like I know many authors that would hope to have the idea just sort of come up from a friend being like, let's go do this crazy thing. And then also to have the book deal come to them like, just like that.
Well, it wasn't quite that easy, but you know, conceptually, look, it's a treasure hunting story, and you know, that's a very cool and exciting thing, and that resonates with people, you know, and you know, there were a lot of questions in terms of, again, you know, stuff like, well, there's no ending, and no one's going to find this thing in your time in the book, and I was like, okay, obviously, but you know, that's okay, because I really didn't see it as being about that in so many ways. But when that obviously does happen, you know, you can hopefully take advantage of it. And so, you know, incredibly, that kind of worked out. So that was really nice. But, you know, it's just such a universal thing. You know, treasure hunting is something that brings everybody back to their childhood, into the idea of believing in things, into the idea of, you know, that there's crazy stuff out there that's kind of bigger than ourselves and that you can dive into those things. And so it's just an attractive idea. And if you can transmit to somebody that people will probably, hopefully want to read a book about this crazy, attractive idea, and that you can make it fun for them and not heavy, and you can translate why people want to be in a treasure hunt, then, you know, maybe it works. And so, you know, somebody believed in it and that was enough.
Excellent. I'm curious. So is it a spoiler to talk about what happened in 2020?
Not in my mind, no.
Okay.
It's a smaller spoiler to talk about perhaps my level of involvement in that, but I certainly don't think that the fact that the treasure was found is a spoiler in my mind. I think that's pretty widely known.
So you wrote about finding the finding of the treasure and the finder and the outing of the finder for Outside Magazine. And I'm curious how that intersected with your book and if it felt like an opportunity to tease the book, or if you just pulled a bunch of your research from the book and packaged it for Outside, or
well, once you know, it became somewhat clear that, you know, the finder, Jack, was going to potentially have his name come out in court, and he was willing to tell me who he was, you know, I did see that as an opportunity. It was like, okay, you know, I want to just, you know, book aside, just as a journalist, you know, look, if I know something everyone else doesn't know, and I have access to this person who nobody else knows they are at the time, effectively, and maybe he'll let me be the one who's going to tell the world about it, that's a big opportunity, in any case, and so I did see it as an opportunity to kind of almost launch the book, but also I wanted to just be able to stake that ground, to be able to be like, look, I'm about to tell you this cool story about who this guy is. People want to know who this guy is. I have that opportunity. So, all the things kind of intersected well together there. And, I think it was a little before, the publicist type people would have wanted me to quote unquote launch the book. It was like 6 or 7 months out. But when you have an opportunity like that, you're going to take it. So I just, at that time, I hadn't written any of that stuff. A lot of the stuff shows up in the book in that same form later, but that was all written in like a day and a half. So it was like, okay, basically it was done on a very rushed schedule. There was a chance he was going to be outed essentially on a Monday. It didn't happen, but there was some concern about that from him. And I think, on like Thursday, basically, I'm not sure if it was Wednesday or Thursday. I was like, will you let me do this? And, basically within a few days, I had to find a home for that thing, which ended up being outside. I said, look, I've got this thing. You don't know who I am, but this is the guy who found the Forrest Fenn treasure. I can prove it to you. It's fine. You got to trust me. I'll turn it around. Great. Give me like 3,000 words. And it's going to be essentially in exactly the form I give it to you. And we'll run it on Monday. Good. And they're like, what? It worked out pretty well. And so I was able to do that really fast. And then a lot of that material was essentially repurposed later for the book. Because at the time, I was writing this stuff in real time. It wasn't like this was stuff that existed in the book before, because all these events were unfolding in real time. So, which was very much one of the challenges of, doing this book, in that, 6 months out of the publication date, I know look, this is something I didn't understand until I was in the book world, but 6 months out of the publication date, you're not supposed to be writing 3 final chapters and that kind of stuff. That's not what publishers want. They are not excited about that. So, when I was doing that kind of stuff, I appreciate that they trusted me to do that, but it is very much like a race to the finish. And again, I understand for the people who do not live in book world, 6 months from publication does not seem like a race to the finish, but my God, it is. You don't have the ability to change a lot of things past certain times. And even when you do, it's very hard to change them. It requires going through a lot of hoops. So to be doing that at that stage was a little bit tricky.
It takes a long time for the elves to hand cut these deckled edges.
I love what they did with the side of this book. I'm like, this feels very real bookish.
Yes.
I was very impressed with this. So whoever did this, I think, is super cool. I love whatever they did with the pages there.
I also have to say, I definitely prefer this cover to the cover that was teased in the Outside article.
Yeah, that's funny. So I have very little to do with that whole process. Another thing, if we just want to go get inside bookland for everybody, I think people think that the authors come up with the cover concepts and all that stuff. You have almost nothing to do with it. They basically present you with a thing and say, what do you think? And you'd be like, well, I think it's fine, or I don't think it's fine, or you basically have to really hate it to get significant change. And that one, the first version, I was like, I think it's fine. I asked for a few different things from the original, which they had. Doesn't really matter now. Anyway, they was like a ruby instead of the coin in the original version. And I was like, that does not look, it looks like a Jolly Rancher. That I cannot deal with. The coin ended up being better, but then, they went back and they were like, we actually think we have a different concept. I was like, oh, that is very cool. I like that a lot. It speaks to kind of the dichotomy of things and, how many concepts can exist in one. Then my editor was actually the one who wanted to put the X in there. I didn't actually, that had nothing to do with me, but he was like, no, it's cool. And a lot of people have thought that's cool. So I'm like, great, why not? So, but again, this has very little to do with me in terms of the cover of the book. And I think that's largely the case with most of these, but it's just not something I understood before I was involved in this world.
Yes. Well, speaking of being involved in different worlds and kind of backtracking a little, I feel like the book is a crazy adventure story, as you and Beep set off. But there's also this sort of anthropological story of what it's like to be in this culture and that kind of thing. And I was curious, first off, do you have a favorite solve?
You mean one that we came up with, or one that other people came up with, or
either or? Is there just that is super bonkers and I love it, or that makes a lot of sense and I love it, or I wish I had come up with that?
I have heard a lot of them, honestly, and they still come in. At this point, I'm not, it's tough. It's like the treasure's been found, it's like, Anyway, in terms of coming up with solves, I was never very good at it. I just wasn't. A lot of the stuff I came up with was basically like, you could go online and you find like 20 other people had the same thought and probably had searched out those areas. And, I wasn't very good, honestly. But like Beep, he came up with some pretty innovative stuff. I was pretty impressed with like the things he would do. That's what you want. You want people who kind of think differently, and so like, there's a couple things in the book where there are some solves that, seem like they are just crazy on their face. But, I think you have to be a little bit crazy to solve something like this. I thought some of the stuff that was very interesting was people who would look at the actual Thrill of the Chase book itself and would think that, there's things in the paper or that if they drop lemon juice on something, it will reveal like a, secret something or other, like stuff when you're a kid and you can get secret ink, that kind of thing. I thought those were kind of interesting. I never thought that was the case. Pardon me, the case, but some of the stuff I really did like was whether there were hints in the pictures that Fenn drew in Thrill of the Chase and sometimes his other books too, and whether there were secrets to be found in those pictures. And I don't think ultimately there were, maybe there weren't, I don't know. But like, it certainly, those kind of things I think were pretty interesting. I thought those were cool, those kind of solves that people came up with. I think I probably wish I had spent a little more time like looking at those to see if there was stuff there. I remember there was one where everyone thought that, I can't remember what it was exactly now, but that it was like an overflight of an area, and that on one of the tracks of land on the ground, it signified something. And like that kind of stuff was fun to me. I was like, all right, let's go find something in these pictures. I was into those kind of solves. So, the ones that really went a little more esoteric into, well, in 1856, this guy did this, and that means this. I was like, all right, maybe. I wasn't as taken with those.
Was there a favorite place that you went looking? That you would, or
has to be Yellowstone. Yellowstone is just amazing. It's like we were around northern New Mexico a lot more than, Wyoming or Montana, but, and I kind of putted around in Colorado briefly, but for not really much real reason, honestly. But, like Yellowstone's amazing. It's like so crazy. You guys are probably just used to it. Like it's like going to like, I grew up outside New York. It's like going to the Statue of Liberty. It's like, yeah, fine, whatever. You're probably like, yeah, we go to Yellowstone on class trips, So, but to someone like me who had never been out there, it was like, this is nuts. How does this place exist? So, Yellowstone was just so cool, and just kind of wander around it, and one of the concepts I kind of toyed with a little bit in the book is the idea that these places even become more special because you believe there's something now hidden in them. And, the fact that became the case for Yellowstone, I think really did even take it to that next level. It's like, you're looking at all this gorgeous stuff around you, but you're also on this quest to be out there. And so that I think was very, just very, that brought another level to even make it more special in my mind. Not that it really needs it.
So aside from the beautiful solves and esoteric, almost conspiracy theories, within the community itself, I feel like this is also true of the character of Forrest Fenn. And my understanding is that you had sort of a unique privilege in being able to interview him and speak with him pretty extensively. And so I thought that was another interesting part of the book, is sort of, you have this travel log, you have this kind of anthropological look at this community, and then you also have this biography of a very, some would say eccentric, but kind of an iconoclast.
That's a good word for him, yeah.
And I'm curious if you have a favorite Forrest Fenn story, before I dive into some of the other character questions I have.
A favorite Forrest Fenn. So it's funny, like Forrest Fenn was himself very good at telling stories, and he could really get going, I remember there's one time when Cynthia Meacham and I had lunch with him at the Blue Corn Cafe in Santa Fe, and he just basically just kind of regaled us for like an hour with tales of, basically being in the military in the 60s and the kind of stuff he would, little hoops he would jump through to kind of get to do cool things before anyone else and to get to go places. Like he really wanted to be like the guy who got to fly all the cool new planes first. And so he would tell us all these things that he would do to get to like get in with this colonel and, to get that general to listen to him. And he would work this staff aide and this and that. And then they would let him fly the F-4 Phantom before anybody else got to, and so that was a big thing that he was like super into that. And it was funny getting, having him tell all these stories. And I'm like a history nut, I think this stuff is cool. But he was just right back in the moment when he would start going off on these things. And that was really cool to me to get to hear this guy who had just a steel trap memory for this kind of stuff, or at least his version of it. And, who would just kind of go off. And I just really enjoyed, I know that's not exactly what you're asking in terms of favorite Forrest Fenn story, but to hear him tell stories was a really cool thing because he was very gifted at it. He really was. He understood how to put himself into the story and in as the main character. And that comes through in his books and what he did as well, even though he's not in the poem per se, he kind of is, it's his journey to get to the spot. And, the more you understand that, I think that maybe the closer people would have been to finding it. That's a hard thing. That's a 2020 hindsight thing now, obviously. But, it's just, he was a very interesting guy to get to deal with in those ways. And, you say I had a unique privilege. I don't think I had a unique privilege, but I had a rare privilege. And that a lot of people got to interview Forrest Fenn. It was rare that you would get to go back. And that's what I got to do with a lot of people would basically get his 2 hours where you sit with him and he gives you his stump speech and you get like kind of the same version of everything. And he gives that to everyone. And I wanted very specifically to do that same thing. And that's, I think, in like chapter 3 or 4, where I basically do the thing that he does with everybody, where he gives you the reporter's guided tour is what I'll call it, and he goes to the study and you get the sip from the brandy bottle and all this stuff, and it's like that version. And I kind of wanted to like check that box and be like, okay, and now let's do this a little differently. And so what I got to do that other people didn't get to do is I got to go back and I got to go, see him every 6-ish months or so and then say, all right, well, now this stuff happened in the last 6 months. What do you think about this? What about that? What does this mean? Where does this go? And so that allowed me to get a kind of a different perspective on things. And, we wouldn't have to kind of go through all the basic beginning stuff every time, and I could kind of really delve deeper into things and, well, this went wrong. What does that mean? Where are you on this? And what's okay? And what about this development? And so, that was very good. And obviously that, that was a result of a different format that I had than everyone else had, and he was willing to countenance that. And I appreciated that. But that was a good thing. And like, when you're starting a book like this, you don't know what you're going to be able to get, it's like, I'm going to try to do this book. I can go be a treasure hunter and I can go talk to other hunters and I can wander the woods. But if I don't get Forrest Fenn, there's only so far this thing is going to go, and so I remember certainly the first time when he got back to me and was like, yeah, he gave me some thing, which I do think is a line, honestly, that he had heard of my work. He knew it from the Wall Street Journal. And so he was happy to talk to me. I don't think that's true, but Forrest Fenn was very good at making people feel special and making them, feel like he cared about them specifically. And so I think he was happy to do that with me as well. And so, but once I was like, okay, I got this guy, he's going to let me have him be in the book. This now can probably hopefully be a real book, because until then you try 10 different things, you hope they work, but to do a book about something is not just as simple as I'm going to do a book. You have to make the things line up. The ducks have to line up in a row. And so, once I had that kind of in the bag, it was like, all right, we can go forward with this. It's going to work. And then people started dying. So.
But it is, I feel like considering the wild places, and you kind of talk about this in the book as the allure of those wild places and that sense of adventure. I think it's kind of amazing that it took as long as it did for something truly tragic to happen.
Yeah. That's tricky because the hunt had to grow big enough to have people, in large numbers going out in it, not just kind of the original, smaller crew of hunters. And then, then it is to some degree in something like this, I think, going to be a matter of time, and obviously you had the first death in early 2016. You had the next 3 essentially in June of 2017, basically right when I got involved in any real way with this whole thing. And they all happened very rapid fire. And then the most recent death was in March of 2020. And, look, I 100%, but, I think Fenn thought that he could keep giving people hints and it would tell them not to go in bad places. But, I am 100% of the belief that the longer this would have existed, the more deaths would have happened as a result of it. I just think that, the pull is too strong. Once you're out there, the desire to keep going over that next hill is too great, you know, and let's say you're coming from Florida or something, and you're not really familiar with the area, and you're out in Yellowstone, and it's maybe March or April, you know, maybe you shouldn't be out there then, but you are. That was the time you could go. You spent a couple $1,000s in total cost to be out there for, you know, a week or whatnot, and you got the sunk cost issue then, so you got to deliver something, you know, and so it's maybe you have to tell your spouse, you don't want to go back and say, I didn't find anything. I'm sorry. I knew I was going to find it, but I didn't. You know, there's a lot of people who are like, this is a recreational pursuit, but there's also people who are like, I'm going to go find the treasure. I know where it is. It's going to happen now. Our lives are about to change. And if you can't deliver that, you know, that's a problem in that context. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I think there's a lot of times when people would say, you know, okay, I've just got to keep going. I'm so close. If I can't do this now, I won't be able to come back for 6 months or a year or who knows when. And, you know, that leads them to then go that extra spot when they probably shouldn't, or when they're not prepared for the elements, or they don't have enough food or water, or these various things. And so, you know, I think that those situations absolutely would have kept occurring if, you know, that hunt had remained out there. And that is unfortunate, but also kind of, you know, part and parcel of this.
I am just thinking in the back of my mind too, about that sort of sense, a little bit of manifest destiny and like sunk costs and those kinds of things. And it's like, oh, well, that's not quite as lost as we thought it was. And it does shed the successful adventures into these wild places. I think it makes them more extraordinary in a way, because it's very easy to some extent to not return.
Yeah, I mean, look, this was definitely a crazy thing. And, you know, the more you look into kind of the history of treasure hunting, which I tried to do a lot in the book and kind of put this in larger context of, you know, where does this fit in the history of these things? You know, what is this thing's role? What is its place? Does it belong and all that? You know, you see how many people have died doing treasure hunts and how much, you know, how few, you know, I think there's a line in the book where, you know, there are easier ways to get rich, including buying a lottery ticket, than going on a treasure hunt. You know, your odds of actually coming up with anything, even if you have a well-funded operation, even if you have, you know, great resources on your side, are incredibly small. You know, even for people who do this professionally. And so, you know, just it's the needle in the haystack element of this is undeniable. It's just that's what it is. And so, but people are willing to take those chances. You know, people want to believe in something. They want to be a part of something. They want to do something grand and grandiose and all that. And so, you know, you just would see these kind of things. And, you know, look, learning about like treasure hunting history and all that, I think definitely gave me a lot of context for understanding kind of Fenn's hunt better and how it fit in, and some of the hunts that had been similar to it in the past, and maybe some of the hunts that it built on, even if unintentionally. You know, you really do see kind of a spectrum there. And I think that this thing and all the other hunts really are on, you know, kind of on that same continuum, depending exactly where, but, you know, they all kind of fit.
Definitely. I'm curious how some of that exploratory psychology existed in Fenn himself, and what drove him to collect all of these things in the first, like, how did he end up with a treasure to hide?
I think part of that was personal, part of that was professional. You know, he had wanted to essentially, you know, he was somebody who always cared about history. He was somebody who these things meant a lot to him. You know, when he was in the military, he would go fly his jets over old, you know, Roman sites in Libya and Algeria, and he would go and look at some of, you know, land near them sometimes, and, you know, just go look for things himself, you know. And he really felt a connection to the past, and he felt a connection through objects to the past, that made it feel real to him. And so, you know, when he became an art dealer and antiquities dealer professionally, you know, he began to acquire all those things as a part of what he was doing, as part of his job. And so, you know, I think when he started the treasure chest concept, a lot of those things are just gold. You know, there's gold coins in there, but then there's also items of significance to him and to his career, and things that, he really curated that treasure chest. He really thought about what kinds of things should go in it. And it's funny that some of the previous incarnations of it, I think all of the things actually look much cooler. There were some very interesting, like big jewels and that kind of stuff that were in earlier versions of the chest that didn't make it into the final edition. And I kind of want to know, why did those things get taken out? They were very much like, treasure hunty, but maybe he didn't want that. Maybe he didn't want things to seem almost rote treasure hunt, as it were. But he just
one of the kids needed to go to college.
What's that? Oh yeah,
or
maybe.
One of the kids
right. You
needed
gotta
to go to
hawk a
college.
giant jewel. Yes, I think he was doing okay, but maybe. But yeah, he collected a lot of these things just as part of what he was doing for his job, and then I think certain ones came to mean more to him, and he thought that they would work well in the treasure chest, and at a certain point, he wanted to quote unquote take some of it all with him. So as he told people, when he was hiding the chest. So. Yeah, look, it's who knows why you put things in a treasure hunt chest and why you don't, unless you're Forrest Fenn to some extent. But these things were, they were certainly not haphazard. He thought a lot about what to put in there and what would have significance and meaning and why.
I was struck even that the box is an 11th century, or excuse me, 12th century.
Wow, good correction yourself there. Yeah.
From the 1100s.
Yeah.
Chest, and like that object in and of itself is the kind of thing that you would sort of expect to see in a museum, let alone the objects that it contains. And that sense of curation and how it just reminds me of some of my old archaeology professors being like, when I die, I want to be buried in a suit of armor carrying an adelatto. Just the scope of all of that, and sort of the context clues, I think, that come from that, especially considering some of his collection was contested at various points of his professional career.
Yeah. I mean, the chest itself is a pretty impressive thing. And it's funny because, we think of the concept of the treasure chest as being bigger than that, I think, most of the time. The chest itself was pretty small. It was, it's 10 by 10 by 5. It's not a big thing. But it is bronze. It's meant to stand the test of time. You think about these treasure chests that, or at least in my memory, something out of Aladdin or something, buried at the bottom of the sea, sunken in Spanish galleon. And they're usually wood. They're not intended to live forever because they weren't supposed to end up at the bottom of the sea. That wasn't the idea. This thing was supposed to last out in the wilderness for an indeterminate period of time. So it had to be something that was very sturdy. And, look, if the thing can last from 1150 to now, it's probably going to do okay another 1,000 years if it needs to. So, I think the treasure chest was important to him. Once he found that thing, he said he knew on the spot that he had to do it use it for this. This was just right. And the chest itself is so fascinating. It's got this castle of love motif, which has, the men scaling the walls to get to the damsels in distress at the top of the tower. And, it's very, very cool thing. I think, the level to which he dealt with this and thought about this kind of stuff really did imbue this hunt with a great deal of why it mattered to so many people. This wasn't about the value of the chest, although that obviously played a huge role, but it wasn't, I would say, about that. It was because Forrest Fenn made this thing have additional significance. He brought himself into it and he kept himself in it. And, he allowed people to speak to him and to communicate with him. And, you could speak to God, as it were, as a part of this treasure hunt. There was this guy laying out this path for you to follow. And I think that is a very, very engrossing notion, that it's not just something out there in the middle of nowhere. It's you're supposed to be following this road that this person laid out for you. And, that makes you feel like there's that guiding hand at play. And I think that there's a real, I don't know if security is the word. What's that?
Seduction.
Sure. That's good. Yes. I'll take that for sure. That's a good one. Yes, that is seductive to think that you are on somebody else's trip that they want you to be on. They really want you to go on that journey and they want you to get to the spot, and that makes people feel special. That is cool. Even if it's everybody gets that same chance, it's still, you feel like you're in communication with that guy as a result of that. And so, yeah, I mean, like he just, the fact that he thought about things like that the treasure chest should matter, like that the treasure chest should be historic and beautiful and important as part of his hunt is part of why this thing grew to what it did, because he put so much thought into things like that.
So I think we've sort of established that he was a very charismatic person. He was very, as I said, iconoclastic, like Renaissance man to some degree. Do you feel like the allure for the hunters was sort of that Deus ex machina of Fenn himself, or do you feel like the majority of that community was more interested in sort of the hunt and the treasure, or were they interested in following this charismatic man?
I think the two are just completely intertwined. I don't think you can really separate one from the other. The machine that the god built is very much of him. This treasure hunt was in so many ways about Forrest Fenn. This was the journey that he wanted people to take to get to the spot where he wanted to die. This wasn't a random location. This wasn't anything, just plucked out of thin air. And then the book that his poem, the vessel for that poem was a memoir. It was all about his life, and it purported to contain clues, and you had to go and seek through it. So, you're learning all about these random factoids from his life, and they are supposed to matter. So, there is no way to separate man and hunt. They are incredibly intertwined, and I think that is important in it. It's not just some random treasure hunt. The fact that there is absolutely a cult of personality element to this, I think is part of what took this to the next level. And the fact that Forrest Fenn was alive and was daring people to go find his treasure, and that then if you did find it, you could go and deliver it to Forrest Fenn, essentially, even though he would sometimes tell you don't do that. And part of the appeal is doing that. Part of the appeal is saying, look, I'm the guy who solved your puzzle. What do you think of that? You get to tell him, like, I did this, and experience his experience in that on the other end, So I think it's all a huge part of it. And it all went together. And, again, a lot of people have asked me, why did this hunt, take off when other ones did not? I think, so much of it is the way Forrest Fenn created it, and that so much was about himself. And I do think absolutely that if he had died before the hunt had ended, I think there would have been a dramatic reduction in interest in it. I think that would have, not that people would have suddenly stopped searching for it, but I think that it would not have continued to grow, certainly at the level it was, and it might have even shrank, then it probably would have gone for a while and taken on kind of a legendary quality, and then it would have, gone back up again. But I think that his involvement in it was a huge part of why it was so popular and continued to be.
Excellent. Well, I just have one more question. So those of you patiently waiting in the audience, don't forget to pick up your copy of Chasing the Thrill. Visit booksincommonnw.com. Click on the logo of your favorite sponsoring store. I do see a couple questions in the chat, but don't be afraid to leave them, your questions, for Daniel there or in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. So here's the easy question, Daniel. Are you still hunting for treasure?
No, I am not. I can't say I will never do that again, but I'm hunting for good stories, and I certainly found one here. And the ability to go and look for this thing was super duper cool. But I don't consider myself now like a treasure hunter who's going to go seek out the next great find. If there's anything I learned from this thing, it's how hard it is to find treasure, and how few look. They're not making more treasure in terms of, I guess they are in little ways, like these kind of things, but treasure is somewhat a finite commodity. There was a lot of it out there in 1700 because they kept sinking ships and people kept doing, but there's less of it every time somebody finds something. So, finding whatever remaining treasures exist in the world probably gets harder as time goes on. There's an inverse relationship there. As treasure declines, the difficulty of finding more treasure increases. So, I'm not going to go to Oak Island with, a 30-man crew and go dig deep for the treasure there. It's, this stuff is hard to find. So, I think for now I'm probably good on treasure hunting, but this has been a very cool thing to be part of this.
Wonderful. So Laura says, I think Fenn said he hid the treasure in part to encourage people to explore and appreciate the beauty of wilderness. Mm-hmm. Do you think he succeeded?
Yes, absolutely. I think there are various reasons that he has said and various reasons which we can assign to him for why he hid the treasure, and, one of his two big reasons, as you note, absolutely, Laura, was that he wanted, people to get off their couch and get out into the wilderness and get kids off their phones and all that. And he also said that he wanted to give people hope. His other big line was that he wanted the redneck in Texas with a pickup truck and a bedroll to go out into the wilderness and search for his treasure. I think both of those things are absolutely true. I think I've heard from many, many people who said that, this inspired them to get out with their kids, inspired them to get out, with friends and family members and go seek this stuff. And that's good. That is a good thing. I think he accomplished a lot of what he was hoping to do with this. I think he did both get people out into the wilderness. I think he also inspired a lot of people and gave them, the ability and the chance to kind of believe in something. And those are both really good things. Look, there are a lot of things people can look at his treasure hunt and say, a lot of not great things happen in some ways here. And that's true. And there's also a lot of good things that happens here. And, you got to kind of put them all together, that this thing is not a universal good enterprise or universal bad enterprise in any way. There are a lot of, good things that came out of it and some not so good things. And those all kind of just, together in what this thing is, because it's not really a simple story, even though it might seem like one on the surface.
It's a very human story, I think, that way.
Yes, very, very much so. And also very much in that, it goes in directions you don't expect it to go. And, that's because that's what happens when people get involved in anything. It's not just about the box. It's about the people seeking the box.
We also have what, if anything, did Fenn communicate to the families of the hunters who died in the search?
He was in contact certainly with several of them. I can't say for sure if he was in touch with all of them. For instance, so I talked to, so Paris Wallace was the guy who died very close to where myself and Beep were searching in the Rio Grande Gorge. And, Fenn wrote a letter to his widow. And, he, I believe, did the same in several of these cases. He was involved in the manhunt, I guess I'll call it, for Randy Bilyeu and his remains. And when it was unclear if he had perished or not, 2016, that ended up with Fenn, Randy Bilyeu's ex-wife, really hating Fenn and leading the opposition against him for a while. But, I think he certainly tried to be in contact with these people and reach out to them and say how sorry he was about what had happened. He was, I think, for the most part, he didn't tricky to say this stuff, but he wasn't in the business of taking responsibility for the deaths, but he was very clear to people that, he was extremely sad that it had happened, and, he wanted to know what he could do. And, he felt very bad that these things had happened. He believed his treasure hunt was a force for good in the world. He believed it should continue, but he didn't want people to die doing it. That wasn't something he took lightly. He understood that the human cost was significant. At the same time, he would give you, his kind of, as I said, stump speech on it. And, where he would say, look, 10 people die in the Grand Canyon every year. We don't close the Grand Canyon. There is risk in everything we do, which is true. And obviously, there are lines in these things. You have to kind of determine, when is something worth it? I think if 100 people were dying in Fenn's hunt every year, I think everyone would agree this is not worth it. If it's one person every 5 years, is it worth it? And look, these are hard judgments to make. I don't know if there's an answer there where the line is crossed exactly, but I think we probably all have some level of, well, that's not okay, or that is okay. But in any case, yes, to answer the original question, I mean, yeah, I'm positive he was in contact with at least 3 of the 5 families of the people who died. I'm going to guess he was in touch with the other ones, although the Bilyeu situation was always a little bit fraught. And it's not exactly clear what happened in some of these cases, but he was definitely in touch with at least 3 of them. And, I think, certainly wanted to give his condolences and, say how sorry he was that things had happened.
Yes. Well, I believe you mentioned that they're celebrating an anniversary of
the find of the treasure was announced, just June 6th. So June 6th, 2020. So that'll be, coming up in 5 or 6 days here now. So, I think that there are some people getting together potentially in various places to kind of look at, celebrate this. I don't actually know that. But I think there might be some people going to Yellowstone. I'm definitely not, but anyone who, yes, right. If anyone is going to Yellowstone, go. If you're flying into Bozeman, go pick up a copy of the book. There we go. Autographed copies. Right. Country Bookshelf, autographed copies right there. Yeah, I mean, I think there are definitely some people who are saying, like, I've seen this kind of chatter online and people have emailed me, is something big going to come out about the hunt on June 6th? It's the year anniversary. And I have absolutely no knowledge that something like that would be the case. I mean, look, you can't say that things aren't going to happen because I guess who knows in one sense, but I have no knowledge of anything like that that's going to happen. I think, there is a little bit of a Mayan calendar concept to this that, on June 6th, all will be revealed. And, I don't have any reason to think that's the case. And then, you push the date off another year and then, the world ends on that date or whatever. But, but I think there are definitely, I don't know if there's celebrations or memorials or commemorations or what, but there's some version of people are definitely taking note of the 1 year anniversary of the announcement of the fine for sure.
Well, that's all I've got. And I don't see anything else in the chat, but I'm going to speak very slowly in case something occurred to our audience. I thank you so much for joining us this evening. Again, Chasing the Thrill. Pick it up at your favorite indie bookstore or visit booksincommonnw.com to purchase it from one of our sponsoring stores this evening. Autographed copies here at Country Bookshelf. I think our sister stores did get some book plates as well, so you can check those out there. We do have Michael Punk coming up on Thursday, so there is more wilderness Western adventure coming up. Thank you so much, Dan, for joining us. Can you tease us with what's coming next, or is it sort of the big sigh of relief now that this book has come into the world?
It's a little of both. I don't have a for sure next thing yet. Definitely got some thoughts and some things I'm looking at, but no, I mean it's somewhat the relief and then somewhat the all right, let's talk about the book a lot now. So there's definitely a lot still to do on this for sure. But yeah, look, this was a very, very cool and crazy adventure to get to be a part of this. And, I really appreciate you guys having me out here in that sense. And, look, the next time I'm in Bozeman, I will make sure to drop by the store.
Wonderful.
So, I look forward to that. Look, I'd love to go back to Yellowstone. So if whatever time that someday happens, I will totally make sure to go there.
Wonderful. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us this evening.